Well, yesterday in the Senate passed the validation bill, basically to kind of rectify the situation that the Privy Council's ruling on the extension for our local government councillors and officials extension, or now the lack thereof, what that ruling caused, just to kind of get things back in line and get all of the work that has been going on in the last 6 months on proper legal footing. Now, the debate was actually somewhat interesting. Of course, those on the government and opposition benches, they sprinkled in their political speak, so to say. So it wasn't necessarily all just factually based. But the independent senators, they also weighed in and gave a slightly different viewpoint on certain things. But then again, maybe it wasn't that different. So for more, it's time to cue this.
Experienced draftsman, multiple lawyers for the state, the lower court, our Court of Appeal, and 2 senior law lords saw the issues one way. But a majority of 3 judges in the Privy Council saw things differently. Had a different panel been drawn, whether the judgment might have been different. In particular, one can't help but wonder whether the presence of 2 Scottish judges in the majority had a discernible effect on the outcome of the case. When you look at paragraphs 30 to 34 and 40 to 42 of the judgment, they strike me as gratuitous. Now, my take on these paragraphs is that the UK Supreme Court, the Privy Council, was firing a shot across the bow of the UK Westminster Parliament. While I don't disagree with the message or the legal learning involved in those paragraphs, one wonders if these paragraphs are foreshadowing leanings or concerns of the UK Supreme Court in the event it is called upon to adjudicate on the Scotland Act 1998 and renewed calls for Scottish independence in the wake of Brexit. Now, my conjecture may be unfounded, but whether one agrees with me or not, it cannot be disputed that the dicta I have just cited represents a warning, not just to this Parliament, but to all parliaments in the Commonwealth, not to play fast and loose with voting rights and democratic processes, and not to make decisions pertaining to representation on behalf of citizens. Whether such dicta were even necessary in this case, given the circumstances, I leave as an open question. The reason we are here today is not to rectify an egregious attempt on the part of government to breach constitutional rights. It's not to rectify an attempt to kidnap the rights of the people to elect their own representatives as alleged. The reason we are here today is to correct what has been held by the Privy Council to be a drafting error.
I think Ravi Balgobin Maharaj must be praised because his legal action ensures that democracy and the right to vote is maintained. It sends a clear message, not just to us, but throughout the Commonwealth, of the citizens' right to vote. So this Privy Council decision, judges, has a broader message, not just us. It sends a much-needed message about the power of the citizens to choose their representatives. But I looked at the question, Mr. President, about, the local government looking at putting it at 4 years and moving it from 3 years. And 3 years would have had the advantage of a mid-year review of any government in position to look and gauge how they are performing, to tell the government, hey, we may not like that, not just looking at councillors underperforming. Also, the fact that if you extend it to 4 years, I say, but why not 5? We are faced with economic challenges. And sometimes it may make more sense, sir, if you have an election, local government election, in tandem with general elections, which could serve as a one election for all.
So I want to focus on Independent Senator Vieira. Now, on the surface, it seems that subtly they were not necessarily exactly on the same page. Because while the Independent Senator Vieira did not have the same sort of bluster that was coming out of the Minister of Local Governments and the opposition bench, because both Senator Mark and Senator Lakshmi Dayal, who we'll have later on to probably speak on this very same topic from that perspective, were very fiery, especially Senator Lakshmi Dayal with her responses to the former AG, now local government minister. But I did find it both interesting and concerning, because to me it felt as though, one, he was sounding like the AG. And that's not his job. He was sounding like the AG in the sense of not just the fact that the content was similar or almost the same or even potentially the same, but he was sounding like a defense counsel.
It's interesting that you say that, because I was listening to that clip then, I was thinking, is he an independent senator?
There's more, you know. There's more justification that he tries to give that I couldn't keep any edit based off of time. And he does a good job make himself sound like he's trying to be independent. But his conclusions, it leaves me question. I don't want to say that he's not independent and get all assertive, but he sounds like he's playing defense for the government. It's difficult not to have that impression, at least to me.
Same thing with me, because I was watching that video and, Senator Anthony Vieira, independent Senator Anthony Vieira in the past, I thought has made some very good points. But in that particular clip, I'm listening to it and I'm listening to what he's saying and what he's suggesting, the points for his arguments, and I'm thinking, hang on, I've heard similar sentiments being expressed previously. Furthermore, the mere fact that you're making the argument or pointing out that, well, there was all these judges who voted in favor, but when it went to the Privy Council, the majority of 3 overruled. And then he went on to suggest that if the majority was different, in other words, if the majority was chosen from a different quadrant, even suggesting that because 2 of the judges were Scottish, descent, did that have an impact on the judgments as well? Even saying it might have been a bow shot at Westminster. I was confused. I was like, listen, what does this really have to do with what we're debating here today? If you want to give history and context, you're not doing a very good job at it. You're just actually skewing your argument further.
I think I understand one of the arguments given by the opposing side. I don't necessarily want to just say the opposition bench or the lawsuit, is the fact that, this is going against the Constitution, which technically it does not, because local government is not technically in any part of the Constitution, right? So technically the government is correct. This could be where the opposition's communication is doing themselves a disservice. But the irony is the opposition has more or less dropped that issue. So they approach the issue in a technically incorrect manner, and the ruling more or less showed that, look, you're all saying this is unconstitutional, it's a waste of time. The opposition has dropped it. The government is still defending it, still trying to defend, look, this was constitutional, and now the independent senators coming in and saying it. Furthermore, when he basically says this is conjecture about the Scottish law lords and how their politics might be influencing the decision, well, I have to ask, is this Senator Vieira sending a shot across the bow of our parliament, saying, well, look, I'm priming you to say we should be on the CCJ and not with the Privy Council?
You also have to understand it is very much a fine line as well. Because from time to time as an independent, you are going to agree.
Yes.
Or disagree. It's going to happen. We've positioned ourselves here on Talking Point as being impartial, never aligning ourselves with one side. But we have been accused of being biased many a times. Why? Because there are times that we would agree with what the government does, or we would disagree. We would agree with what the opposition does, or disagree. So there is a fine line as well to being an independent. You are in that position where you have a privilege of not having to toe a line, but at the same time, there are going to be times you're going to agree or disagree. So as much as I'm questioning where Senator Anthony Vieira was coming from, and as much as I'm saying it skewed his argument, I think it took away from the argument that he was trying to make, even going into the narratives of the Scottish descendants and all that sort of stuff. I also recognize and understand that there's going to be times that, listen, you know what? It's a very good point that the Attorney General made. I'm going to agree with this in my argument. You know, I disagree with what... Put it this way. The same argument we're making for Anthony Vieira, I could also ask, should independent Senator Varma Dialsingh praise Mr. Balgobin Maraj? Should he have said that as part of his contribution to the debate? Because we all know that Mr. Balgobin Maraj is an activist who's aligned with the opposition. So, I mean, come on. It works both ways.
The interesting thing is, I found that independent Senator Vieira was similar to the AG as well, or sounding similar to the AG, in the sense that he sounds very much like defense counsel, arguing the technicalities of the law if he is trying to present a legal defense. But he's not in the courtroom, as the opposition likes to point out to the government. He is in the Senate. He is not acting as defense counsel. He is an independent senator. So to me, I would argue that he needs to have wider considerations beyond just what he thinks is good technical legal doctrine, which, just like the government, you're on one hand saying, well, look, you know, the Privy Council rule and we have to go with the ruling because that's the law of the land and the majority rules. But 5 out of 8 judges agreed with us. And in this case, whereas it's one thing for the other senator to, you know, praise the activist. What is he doing? Well, he's praising the activists for a singular situation. It doesn't necessarily go beyond that, right? The judgment does have far-reaching implications for Commonwealth jurisdictions. But Senator Vieira's statements, and we've said this when the AG said it, it potentially undermines the authority of the Privy Council. Because what you're saying is, yes, we understand that this is the law of the land. Privy Council is senior. But you're constantly trying to make the argument that there is validity when the appeal court judges side with our situation. You're trying to bring in the draftsmen, the appeal court judges, all the people underneath the Privy Council to justify, well, look, legally we're not that wrong.
No, Sean, I'm sorry, I disagree with you in that sense. I don't think anybody has the power to undermine the Privy Council. I don't even think any of the statements expressed
but you're doing it.
I think the thing is, in the sense that even though you're saying, in defense of independent Senator Dr. Varma Dialsingh, that, listen, okay, you know, he praised Ravi Balgobin Maraj for a singular issue because the case has far-reaching implications, etc., etc. What he's done, that is independent Senator Varma Dialsingh, and what independent Senator Anthony Vieira have done, is skew perception. And this is what I'm saying. It's very difficult, and in the society that we live in, it's just how we're debating it right now. There are going to be moments when you think, listen, hold on, they sound as though they're politically aligned, when in fact they have every right to express what they did. So I don't think it's necessarily a matter of undermining the Privy Council, for example. What I will say, where I will agree with you, is you do have to be careful what you say, because public education and public perception, unfortunately in TNT that we live in and how people tend to think, he ain't doing justice, he ain't doing good.
All I'll say is this. First of all, there are many examples in history where horrible things were approved of by the majority, not just little things like this. But second of all, this is how you get your government, your society to degrade. It's little steps. So like you said, in the public discourse, you make it seem, well, yeah, the Privy Council is the final, court, but we'll still lump in all these other legal opinions with them, and to some degree make it seem as though, unofficially they carry the same weight And that's how you start the process. It's not an overnight thing of undermining the Privy Council, which is why I said, just like he had that comment on the Scottish Law Lords, is he now taking a shot across the bow at the Privy Council and making a case to go to the CCJ, right? The answer is he's probably not. But based off of his logic and how he judged the Scottish Lords, I'm just using his logic to now craft a similar hypothesis, a similar line of reasoning onto him.
Don't use somebody else's logic to try and...
against them?
No, not
Why
against
not?
them. To come up with a theory, because we have not one clue what Anthony Vieira really is thinking. And trust me, I'm basing that over the fact that I interviewed him a couple of weeks ago, and even I was... Let's take a break here, ladies and gentlemen.